Welcome everyone to Really Dicey. This is Manny,
And I'm RJ.
and today we're going to talk about Van Richtman's Guide to Ravenloft. We're going to go through each section and talk about the wonderful things and disappointing things we found in this book. This book is about 256 pages. It has two covers. The regular cover, which you can find in most stores, which has Van Richtman and Ez Davnir, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, fighting Strahd with the castle in the background, or the special cover with Esmeralda Davnir standing against the demi-plane of dread. It has an introduction, 5 chapters, and an appendix, which the appendix not really much. It's just a drawing of the Ouija board, or at least their version of the Ouija board. The introduction is only 9 pages long, and it's pretty much a explanation about what you're going to see in this book, pretty much. But let's get to the good stuff. Chapter 1, character creation. It's about 25 pages. You have new rules about how to create a haunted hero, including 3 new lineages: the Hexblood, Dampier, and the Reborn. Also talks about dark gifts, 2 new subclass options: Warlock, Undead. You can have an undead patron for your Warlock. There's a College of Spirits for bards.
Yeah, this is the chapter for players. The 3 lineages they give, the Dampier, I have no idea how to pronounce that, Hexblood, and Reborn. Dampier is basically a partial vampire. The Hexblood is a partial hag, and then the Reborn is whatever you've become after dying and coming back to life somehow. And there's plenty of ways to do that in the Domains of Dread. The dark gifts, there's 8 dark gifts that you can start with, or you can earn them during play. They're very similar to the dark gifts that were in Curse of Strahd, and hopefully that's not too much of a spoiler, but they're a lot less game-breaking than those ones. The 2 subclass options, you've got the Bard College of Spirits, which is basically your occult spiritualist. So if that's sort of your jam, then now it's available. And then you've got the Warlock of the Undead, which is a warlock whose patron is a deathless being, like a lich or a vampire, or even another dark lord. And they've got a dreadful form that they can take that powers a lot of things. Characters are also going to get 5 new background features that you could drop into any background. Those are Inheritor, Mist Wanderer, Spirit Medium, Trauma Survivor, and Traveler. And there are also 12 new personality traits, 12 ideals, 12 bonds, and 12 flaws, all that have horror themes for your characters. There's 2 new backgrounds, although one of them was printed in Curse of Strahd, that's the haunted one, but it has been updated with a couple of corrections, and the other one is the Investigator. And then finally, there's a table of 100 horror trinkets, which expands on the list of horror trinkets or gothic horror trinkets given in Curse of Strahd, which was less than 100. So now it's a full 100.
The lineages are interesting because they kind of trump over whatever race you picked for the character, which is very interesting. So let's say you pick a dwarf and you want that dwarf to be a Dampier. They may take some of the proficiency skills that a dwarf would have had or be able to pick from, but the Dampier aspect of it, all the benefits you get to being a Dampier or curse, depending how you look at it, like the vampiric bite, for example, that you'll now have for that character.
That's really great because that means during gameplay, now you can have these things happen to characters and they adopt this lineage, and it doesn't replace who they are, but it changes who they are.
College of Spirits for bards is great. I love the idea of having these spiritual characters appear and fight for you in some way and do almost these random effects every time you use your deck of cards or a similar item. I thought that was really cool. Warlock Undead is interesting, gaining abilities from a patron as powerful as a lich. That's cool. I didn't see any flaws with it. Chapter 2, creating Domains of Dread, very interesting chapter. I felt that this is misplaced. I think this should have been after they introduced all the many domains that have available.
Yeah, these chapters, they should have, I would have liked to see them in a different order because I read the book in order. I would have liked to see Horror Adventures come first, then Domains of Ravenloft, then creating Domains of Dread. But it's not that big of a deal, I guess.
Yeah, but this section does have rules about creating dark lords, creating genres of horror, all the different horrors that you can incorporate into this setting, from folk to cosmic horror, all sorts.
Yeah, so this chapter is really great for if you're going to roll your own domain, your own horror story. So it tells you how to create a Dark Lord, things to consider, what are their flaws, how are they corrupted, how are they transformed, and then how to create the domain itself, which is centered on the Dark Lord. All the details you need to flesh out, the culture, the monsters, and how to create adventures in that domain. The most useful part of this chapter is the genres of horror. So they give you 10 genres of horror. 6 of them are the primary ones. And for each of those, they're going to give you a description of the genre, but also the monsters that belong in that sort of horror, 6 to 10 of the villains that can exist in that sort of horror, torments for the Dark Lord in that sort of horror, and settings, adventure sites, plots, which is really, really great if you're going to write your own horror or even to understand the type of horror that you're seeing here. And those genres, by the way, they are body horror, cosmic horror, like you mentioned, dark fantasy, folk horror, ghost stories, and gothic horror. And then there's some minor genres, including like disaster horror and slasher horror. But those ones are not given in as much detail.
Let's talk about chapter 3, the biggest chapter in the book. I believe over 120 pages. There are 17 domains that they have at least 4 to 8 pages of content dedicated to it. And there are 22 other domains with a brief description in the back. And that information includes the description of the domain, who the Dark Lord is, the origin of the domain and the Dark Lord, interesting locations, the towns around there, interesting NPCs, and they have listings, of course, of the monsters that would be in that domain.
Yeah, this chapter has a great explanation of how the domains of dread work across the different domains. What are the mists? How do they work? How you can travel them, and how magic and planar travel and death works, and how it's related to the dark powers and dark lords. It also describes what it's like to live here because you can make characters that come from one of these domains. Yeah, each of the domains has also an entire domain map. So a map of the entire domain is given to you. It's kind of small. I think they take up maybe a third of a page, but it's great for establishing an adventure in that domain. After the domains, which is the bulk of this book, you also have a couple pages on the Keepers of the Feather and a couple on the Vistani, and notes for creating characters from these cultures, as well as 6 other organizations that travel the mists, such as the Priests of Azibus. And then you get profiles of 9 famous mistwalkers, including Rudolf van Richten.
I think my favorite thing about the section is that they have domains from different mythologies. For example, I'm going to probably butcher the name, Dementelu, which is a French setting, but has vibes of Edgar Allan Poe's work. They also have Kalakari and also Ikaf, which is both like Asian based mythology. I love that the Jianxi make an appearance in this book. I thought that was great. Again, apologize if I'm mispronouncing these names. One of my favorite ones is Valkovnia, which is a mixture of Frankenstein meets Dark City.
I mean, you've got a domain here that's basically zombie apocalypse that never ends. You've got a plague domain, which hits a little close to home right now. You've got Lamordia, which is the domain of snow and stitched flesh, which is basically steampunk body horror. There's quite a variety of domains.
My personal favorite is the Tempest one. Because it's I always been unnerved by certain folk horror like The Wicker Man or the more recent one, Midsummer. I don't know, something about the cult mentality and weird like religions or so, I don't know, creep me out. And the setting for that it's great. Like I would love to play this.
Yeah, I think my favorite one would be Harakir, the domain of the ancient dead, which is a very ancient Egypt theme. Deserts and pyramids, curses and mummies. That's also got a lot of flavor that I really like.
Chapter 4, Horror Adventures. Again, I felt this was also misplaced. I think this should have been more in the beginning. Because again, it talks about session 0. It talks about like rules for like curses, implementing fear and stress to characters and how it affects the roles. They have a cool section about haunted traps and survivors as a sidekicks, yes. And they have Survivor as an option for that. They also have an adventure at the end called The House of Lament, which I think I read the story for that is great. And it has maps for it and encounters. It's probably the most fleshed out adventure or adventure seed in this book.
The pregame preparation that they give you is very detailed. So it gives you specific questions to ask your play group about the themes, the boundaries, and the rules they want to use in the game, and how to adjust and enforce those boundaries during play. It gives you a lot of tips for running horror games, as you might imagine, how to pace the tension and relief, techniques for building suspense, etc. Encourages the use of props. They give you in the appendix a spirit board that you can print out, I guess, and use for an adventure. But what I really like in this chapter is that we get rules for curses, finally. And this is something I think 5e has been needing for a while. And they give you 4 sample curses as well. They also give rules for fear and stress. And these are different than the Dungeon Master Guide's fear rules. I think they're actually much more palatable to players than the Dungeon Master Guide's one, which would leave you frightened for a whole minute, which kind of takes you out of the game. But in this case, the maximum is you're going to be frightened for a turn. And then the stress rules is interesting. You basically get a stress score, it starts at 0, and it can go up or down. And whenever you roll an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you're just going to subtract whatever your current stress level is from that roll. It's pretty simple, and it goes up under certain conditions, like witnessing the death of a loved one, for example. I also like the Seeds of Fear, which is basically kind of like a flaw. Your character will pick a fear or two. For example, being followed chills my blood. And whenever you act out that seed of fear, the DM gives you inspiration. It's a way for a character to act out one of their character's fears and to force the DM to give them inspiration, or encourage the DM to give them inspiration. There's also rules for haunted traps, which are basically haunted phenomena that happen in certain areas that can negatively affect you. And each of these haunt traps has a haunt bonus, like +0, +2, +3. And there's some rules, some mechanical rules for detecting them, how does divine sense, how do spells interact with that, and for disarming them, such as using the remove curse spell or other spells, or channel divinity. Survivors are an interesting addition. These are playable characters, levels 1 to 3, that your players can play. They're basically cannon fodder for the horror story, right? And there's 4 kinds. There's apprentices, which are the magic users, disciples, sneaks, and squires. And when they level, they gain talents. And there's 8 talents to pick from. One of them, for example, is the talent called Desperate Scream. And when you make a saving throw, you can scream and you'll get advantage on that saving throw. And you can use that twice per long rest, which just adds to the horror tropes, right?
Chapter 5, the monsters of Ravenloft, over 30 monsters. Some of these monsters you could tell they're inspired by what we see in pop culture, like Cthulhu, Little Shop of Horrors. Well, Nosferatu speaks for itself. My personal favorite, though, is the vampiric mind flayers. I just think that's a very horrifying thing to give to players.
Yeah, I like the new zombie sort of beings that are available, because zombies are great, but it's good to have some variety in your zombie horror. What's also in this chapter is how to modify existing monsters for horror, and how to create really unique nightmare monsters, which are great reads and really great for helping a DM to create some new content. The challenge rating range for these monsters goes from 1/8 all the way up to 21, but most of them are in the 1 to 10 range.
What did you like and didn't like about this book?
For Dungeon Masters, if you are playing Curse of Strahd, this is not going to add much to your Curse of Strahd game, except for the rules on fear and stress. I would use those in Curse of Strahd game. But other than that, you won't get anything new out of this book for Curse of Strahd specifically, even though Barovia is one of the domains that is called out. I think this is an excellent resource for non-Curse of Strahd horror games in 5e. So even though there are plenty of other horror genre games out there, for 5e, I think this is a really great resource for horror play. Each domain is really enough content for a campaign. Almost all of them you could do a whole campaign in, at least the major domains. I don't know about traveling across the domains, which is described quite a bit. I think that's a bit much. That's a bit too much horror. You're going from horror to horror, and each one is as big as a campaign. I don't see most groups doing that. I imagine most people will go in and do a domain and then close the door. So yeah, for DMs, I think if you really want to play horror in 5e, then you do need this book, unless you're playing Curse of Strahd, in which case you don't need this book, but the fear and stress rules would add a little bit extra.
I would be happy to have this in my collection. You know, I'm glad to have read it. I love resource books. I like books that has tons of information, tons of entry seeds, so that if I'm like have a creator's block or dungeon master's block, if that's such a word. I could just pick out a book, kind of read and start thinking of things, start planning things in my mind. I think what turns me off to this book a little bit is that this book is really made for beginners. And I think the way I would use this book, honestly, is that if players want to do a horror game, say, let's say it's Halloween, if I could find that out ahead of time, we would pick an adventure together, talk a little bit about what we want to do, kind of the session zero type of thing. And then even though there's not enough, in my opinion, maps and materials to help out dungeon masters, I think I would have enough time to prepare and do something for that. So I think in that sense, it's really good. Even though I may not have been scared, this is not a horror novel. It's a guidebook. It's a toolkit so that game masters can run their horror games no matter what level it is. For those of you who have looked at the book, what did you think? Did you enjoy it? What did you like? What you didn't like? Let us know in the comments below. I guess that's it. Stay safe out there. Have a good day.